It was a calm afternoon in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing ever seems to happen until it does. A group of riders roared through the streets on their motorcycles, their engines shattering the peace like a thunderstorm. They were loud, reckless, and looking for trouble. They thought they owned the road, intimidating anyone who dared to cross their path. But little did they know, their antics had caught the attention of someone they should have never underestimated. Living just a few houses down was a retired Air Force veteran, a man who had spent years serving his country, trained to handle far more dangerous situations than noisy bikers. At first, he watched from his front porch, silent and composed, his sharp instincts kicking in. But when their behavior crossed the line, he decided enough was enough. What happened next? Let's just say they messed with the wrong man. The veteran, known to his neighbors as Mr. Hayes, was a man of few words, but carried an undeniable presence. Decades of discipline and service had shaped him into someone who didn't back down easily. Most of the neighborhood kids knew him as the kind man who fixed bikes and gave firm but fair advice, but they also knew not to test his patience. As the riders sped up and down the quiet streets, their taunts and reckless behavior grew bolder. They were weaving between parked cars, revving their engines loudly, and startling families out for an evening stroll. A few neighbors exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do, hesitant to get involved. From his front porch, Mr. Hayes watched them closely, his mind assessing every detail. He wasn't the type to act without purpose, but his jaw tightened as he noticed one of the riders doing something that crossed a line. One of the riders had stopped near a small park where a group of children played under the watchful eyes of their parents. He revved his engine loudly, the sharp sound causing the kids to cover their ears. Parents rushed to pull their little ones back, their faces filled with a mix of anger and fear. The rider laughed, throwing a smug glance at the concerned crowd before spinning his bike in a tight circle, leaving tire marks on the sidewalk. From his porch, Mr. Hayes stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He noticed the unease spreading through the neighborhood. People were peeking out from behind curtains, unsure if they should step in or stay out of it. The riders seemed to feed off the tension, growing louder and more reckless with every passing moment. Mr. Hayes wasn't a man to act on impulse, but this wasn't something he could ignore. He calmly stepped inside his house, the screen door creaking softly behind him. A few moments later, he reappeared, carrying something that immediately caught the attention of anyone watching. It wasn't a weapon, nothing threatening or illegal, but it was enough to make a statement. And when he stepped onto the sidewalk, his quiet determination spoke louder than any words ever could. Mr. Hayes walked down the driveway, his steps steady and deliberate. In his hands was an old, folded flag, a symbol of the country he had served and the discipline he carried with him every day. The riders noticed him now, their laughter faltering as they exchanged glances. Something about his calm demeanor made even the boldest among them uneasy. The lead rider, a tall man with a leather jacket and a cocky smirk, revved his engine and inched forward. "What's the matter, old man? Too much noise for you," he called out, his voice dripping with arrogance. The other riders chuckled nervously, not quite sure whether to follow his lead. Mr. Hayes stopped a few feet from them, his expression calm but unshakable. "This neighborhood is a place for families, not your playground," he said firmly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that demanded respect. His words weren't loud, but they were enough to silence the group for a moment. The lead rider scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He revved his engine again, as if trying to assert dominance. "And what are you going to do about it?" he challenged, leaning forward on his bike. Without flinching, Mr. Hayes raised the flag slightly, letting the wind catch its edges. "You're about to find out," he said, his tone calm but resolute. Around them, neighbors began stepping out of their homes, drawn by the tension building in the air. The riders now found themselves the center of attention, their confidence starting to waver as they realized they weren't just facing one man. They were facing an entire community, emboldened by his quiet strength. The riders exchanged uneasy glances as more neighbors emerged from their homes, forming a quiet but growing crowd behind Mr. Hayes. Mothers holding their children, elderly couples, and even a few teenagers. Everyone seemed to be rallying together. The once empty street was now buzzing with an unspoken unity, and the riders suddenly didn't look as confident as they had moments before. The lead rider sneered, trying to regain control. "Looks like you've got yourself an audience," he said, his voice carrying a nervous edge. But before he could say more, another figure stepped forward from the crowd, a young man in a navy blue hoodie. His face was calm but focused, and he walked up to stand beside Mr. Hayes. "Is there a problem here?" the young man asked, his voice steady. The rider seemed caught off guard, and for good reason. The man's hoodie bore an unmistakable patch, a symbol of his own military service. He wasn't just any bystander, he was a Marine. The air grew heavier, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The lead rider hesitated, glancing at his crew as if looking for backup. But now more people were stepping closer, their confidence growing with each passing moment. What had started as one man standing his ground had turned into a united front. But just as the riders seemed to waver, one of them, a younger man in the back, pulled something out of his jacket, a move that instantly set everyone on edge. The crowd froze, and even Mr. Hayes' expression darkened as he locked eyes with the rider. The stakes had just been raised, and the peaceful resolve everyone had hoped for now hung by a thread. The younger rider's hand moved slowly, drawing everyone's breath tight as they watched to see what he would do. Mr. Hayes stood firm, his sharp eyes locked on the rider, his body poised and ready. The Marine beside him shifted slightly, his stance calm but clearly prepared for anything. Tension rippled through the crowd like an electric current. But instead of pulling out something dangerous, the rider revealed a small object, a can of spray paint. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief, though the unease lingered. Emboldened by the reaction, the younger rider smirked and shook the can. "What?" "Just making my mark," he said, lifting it as though to tag the side of a nearby fence. Before he could make a single move, Mr. Hayes took one decisive step forward. "Put it down," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that cut through the noise. The rider froze, caught off guard by the commanding tone. For a moment, it seemed like he might challenge him, but something about the unwavering resolve in Mr. Hayes' eyes stopped him. Slowly, the younger man lowered the can, his confidence crumbling. The lead rider, seeing the shift in momentum, clenched his jaw and revved his engine one last time. "Let's go," he barked, his bravado fading as he realized they were outmatched, not by force, but by sheer presence. One by one, the riders started their engines and backed away, their earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet retreat. As the roar of motorcycles faded down the street, the crowd broke into quiet applause, relief washing over them. Mr. Hayes turned to the Marine with a small nod, their shared understanding needing no words. But just as the neighbors began to disperse, one of the children ran up, holding something in her tiny hands. "Mr. Hayes, you drop this," she said, handing him a small coin, an Air Force Challenge coin, glinting in the fading sunlight. Mr. Hayes smiled, slipping it into his pocket. "Thank you," he said softly. As the crowd thinned, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. But for everyone who had been there, they knew they'd witnessed something more than just a confrontation. They had seen what true strength looked like. And for the riders, They'd think twice before causing trouble in this quiet neighborhood again. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, the street returned to its usual calm. Families lingered outside, chatting softly, their earlier fear replaced with a sense of pride and connection. The events of the day had reminded everyone of the power of unity and how even one person's courage could inspire an entire community to stand together. Mr. Hayes walked back to his porch, his steps unhurried. He paused for a moment, looking out at the neighborhood he had quietly protected for years. The Marine stopped by to shake his hand, offering a simple, "Thank you, sir." Mr. Hayes smiled, replying, "We all look out for each other here." As he sat back in his chair, the evening air cool and quiet, the sound of children laughing echoed faintly from the park. Order had been restored, and the lesson was clear. Respect and strength go hand in hand.